Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington.
And I'm Chris McCurry. And today we are very pleased to be welcoming as our esteemed guest, my wife of almost 37 years, Dr. Sue McCurry. Sue is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in behavioral sleep medicine and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBT-I. She is research professor emeritus at the University of Washington School of Nursing and works in private practice here in Seattle. Her clinical work draws on behavioral gerontology and acceptance and commitment therapy. She has published 2 books and over 180 peer-reviewed journal articles and 30-plus years of research covering insomnia in older adults, sleep disturbance alongside chronic pain such as osteoarthritis, menopausal sleep, and sleep problems in people with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers. Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets, Sue McCurry.
Thank you so very much, Chris and Emma. I'm surprised and delighted to be here.
Well, it seems like sleep is big these days. It's big in the news. It seems like every week or so I see another article, New York Times, Washington Post, or whatever, saying sleep hacks, how to optimize your sleep. It seems like it's becoming another big wellness trend. We have devices that will track our sleep, and we're under surveillance even when we're trying to sleep. And yet there's a lot of misunderstanding, or what I think of as myth understanding about sleep that we'll unpack today. Where should we begin with our understanding of sleep so that we can all get the sleep that we need and not stress quite so much about it?
Well, in thinking about that, I suppose the one message I would give to our listeners is that the big mistake people make about sleep is they expect sleep is something that I should be able to do whenever and wherever I want and for as long as I want, that it's under my control. And the reality is it is not under your control. And we need to shift people to the perspective. There are things that I can do to promote and support good quality sleep. And those are the practices that we want people to establish.
So how did we get to this point where people are so crazed about sleep? I mean, give us something of the history of sleep in our culture.
Well, it's pretty interesting. I sent ahead to you all a very fun interactive link from Harvard that goes through the history of human sleep, all the way back to 800 BC in Homer's Odyssey. But it takes us up through 2020. And it's a fascinating, fun thing if you're interested in the history of sleep to look at. But
we'll have that in the show notes for this episode.
That would be great. But what's interesting about sleep in the modern era is up until the 1800s, really until the Industrial Revolution, at least in Western cultures, the tendency was for people to sleep in 2 chunks. It was called the first sleep and the second sleep. So people were often going to bed at, say, 9, 10 o'clock, and they were sleeping till midnight, 1, and then they'd be up for an hour or 2, and then they'd go back and they'd get their second sleep. The 2 sleeps were about the same size in length. And in between, people did all sorts of things. They read, they laid in bed and meditated and prayed. They got up and chatted with their neighbors. They had sex. That this was a time that everybody did this. And in the 1800s, things started changing. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that. One is in the early 1800s, we got gas lighting. And the end of the 1800s, we got the electric light bulb. And so the availability of light at night changed a whole lot of things. First, it changed it in the communities, right? So our towns could light up the marketplaces. And so people could go out and stay out later, eating and drinking or shopping or doing things. So it, particularly for the more wealthy class and the city urban folks, there's starting to be a shift in how late people would stay up. And when that happened, people are now staying up instead of going to bed at 9 or 10, they're going to bed at maybe 10 or 11 or a little later. And so their sleep drive, which is one of the two biological processes that influence sleep, is homeostatic sleep drive, the need to sleep. By the time they're going to bed now, they're going to bed later, so the need to sleep is higher. So perhaps what's happening is when they go to sleep, they sleep longer before this natural middle of the night awakening happens. And so the first sleep starts getting longer and the second sleep starts getting shorter. And then there's some cultural changes that start happening in the 1800s, late 1800s. The writers and thinkers were also becoming very big on health and nutrition and exercise. And they started emphasizing that you should sleep that first sleep, it should be longer, and then you get up. And if you go back and you do a second sleep, that it's actually kind of lazy, that you should be up and getting to work or doing something productive. So again, not so much in the rural communities, but in the cities, I think, there started to be this push towards a longer first sleep, and then, let's not do the second sleep at all. And that seems to me to be the starting point for why we have the kind of sleep recommendations we have now. Everybody should sleep, 7 to 9 hours in one chunk at night. It was right around this era, too, with the Industrial Revolution, too, that we start having shift work happening. And again, because the availability of light at night, and people are relying more on their timepieces. So they're more conscious of how much time they're doing things and what times they're doing things. A confluence of many effects, I think, that set us up for the kinds of sleep patterns that we have now. But it's interesting because people who have what would be called sleep maintenance insomnia, they fall asleep fine, but they wake up in the middle of the night, often around like 1, 2 in the morning. That is identified as a problem, a kind of insomnia, when in fact it might be that some of these people, maybe many of them for all we know, are people who are naturally reverting back to the chronorhythms that we had for thousands of years until not that long ago.
My goodness, I'm fascinated by these two sleeps. So not necessarily that relevant for our conversation, but so people would get up in the middle of the night in the dark and chat to neighbors. I mean, how would that work in the 1700s?
Well, everybody else was doing it too. So that you would have had starlight and moonlight.
Wow.
And of course, in the new moon, when it was super dark, and perhaps they didn't go outside so much. But
that is wild. I love that.
People had lanterns they could carry with them.
Yeah, they had lanterns. That's right. Before they had gaslighting, there were other ways. The light just wasn't as bright.
That is fascinating. I had no idea. It's a bit like babies.
Kind of.
Yeah. Like they'll be up in the night and decide that actually it's the time to be awake. And parents are like, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Please sleep. Please
and
sleep.
Then, if you think about the history of sleep, so that sort of, in my mind, sets the stage for how we wound up with this one chunk of sleep at night. And it's interesting that it's considered so bad if you wake up in the middle of the night when forever it was normal. But then you add to that, it's only really been since the start of the 20th century that we had anything that resembled sleep medicine or sleep research. So rapid eye movement sleep wasn't discovered until 1953. And the stages of sleep that we know people go through, the non-REM sleep stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, light to deep sleep, then cycle through a REM dream period, that was like in the late 50s. And all these things, melatonin was discovered in the late 50s. And the first sleep labs, I don't think, appeared until the 60s, 70s maybe. So we're talking about a relatively new field of science, which has been exploding in information, both about what sleep is and how to measure it, and gathering scientific communities together to study it with flagship journals and symposiums and conferences, and then discovering the links between poor sleep and various health consequences. So it seems like it's kind of new because it is kind of new. I mean, there's just a lot that is feeding in, and we have a preoccupation with health and wellness and youth in our Western society anyway, certainly in the United States. And this just becomes one more piece, I think, that's laid upon it. And we can certainly point to lots of things in the popular press and in the scientific literature and in books and in podcasts that are telling people you must sleep more. But the problem with that is what I said at the start. You can't make yourself sleep. Sleep is not like a light switch that you can turn off when you want and back on when you want. I joke with many of my clients that come in that they think I, like a Jedi master, have some magic trick that I will teach them that will allow them to go to sleep on command. And I have to start disabusing them of that belief immediately because it's just not the case. So they have to find ways, sort of like the surfer who gets ready to surf, puts on the wetsuit and picks the right day and the right beach and the right time and gasses up the car and the board's all waxed and gets out there and is standing ready to surf, but you have no control over when the waves come in. And that's what we're doing with CBT-I, is we're trying to get everything lined up so people's habits and beliefs and attitudes and environments are aligned to support healthy sleep and to get people so they're not freaked out if they have a difficult night, because being anxious and all aroused cognitively and physically is not going to help you sleep. They put these pieces together to get them ready to sleep, but in the end, they just have to wait for their body to go back to sleep. They can't make them do it. There's no magic trick.
My goodness, so many things I want to unpack. I was thinking about how in the last 40 years, we're started to think about the importance of sleep. And with that has come this idea that you must get good sleep, because if you don't, then I was reading an article. Actually, I wasn't reading it because I don't tend to read these articles, but there was a headline saying, poor sleep is linked to dementia in women, or all these sort of scandalous, distressing articles or headliners that make us more anxious about sleep. But truly, what is it that we need to think about when we think about good sleep when it comes to the individual? Because I've had moments in my life, especially around having babies, hormonal transitions, where my sleep has been more elusive. And it is crazy making, as in it is something that I found myself getting obsessed with, and I'm trained in CBT-I. And I found it incredibly frustrating, depleting, not to be able to sleep what I felt I needed. It was particularly hard when I had children, when I had babies, and they were sleeping. And I was telling myself, you must sleep because you don't know how long you have until they're awake again. And just that pressure meant
You're
I
putting
couldn't
pressure on
sleep.
yourself to
Yeah.
perform.
Yes. Oh, it was real crazy making behavior, to the extent that I actually had my husband sleep with the babies and I would remove myself. But so what are we looking at when we think about ideal sleep? How do we track that? And if it isn't a number of hours, what should it be? What should we be using as a reference?
Well, there is no ideal number. The number everybody hears bantered about is 7 to 9 hours. Everybody's different in how much sleep they need. We know that people who are really short sleepers chronically, now by short sleepers chronically, I'm talking 4 to 5 hours a night chronically. Or people who are really long sleepers chronically, more than 10 hours every night. Actually, both ends of that curve are at increased risk for all sorts of negative health consequences. So there is something about being in the middle. And as we've been talking in this culture, we are presuming that that has to be all in a single chunk. And that accommodates our society fairly nicely. But in reality, if you're getting 8 hours a day and you're getting it in 2 chunks, there are still polyphasic sleepers in the world, even in our own culture, particularly after retirement, that when it's allowed for. But people are usually dissatisfied because nobody else is doing that. It doesn't work very well. So in an ideal sleep situation, you are getting enough sleep for you, regardless of what the number is, that the next day, not the second you sit up in bed and stand to start the day, but after you get up and you wash your face and brush your teeth and you start your day, how do you feel? And as you go through your day, if you're really exhausted, then probably you're not getting enough sleep. Although I will say, sometimes people are seemingly getting plenty of sleep. Say, I get 8 hours a night. I'm so exhausted. Well, those individuals may have an undiagnosed sleep apnea condition, which is leaving them extremely fatigued because they're not aware they're not sleeping, but their brain is aware they're not sleeping, and so they're very tired during the day. So that's one possible thing that can happen. There may be other things that are going on that are contributing to this great fatigue. They might have other health conditions. They might have anxiety or depression. They might have any number of life stressors that are impinging upon them. In their mind, they attribute this all to the fact I'm not sleeping well, rather than looking at the fuller context, because there's a lot of things that make us not feel good during the day. And if it was true that the only people who have all these problems are bad sleepers, then good sleepers would never be tired or would never be depressed or anxious or whatever. It's just the message has gotten oversimplified, I think. And because sleep is an easy target, people can point to it and say that's the problem. But here's the thing. I talk to a lot of my clients about stories. Human beings love stories. We all love stories. And stories are a beautiful thing. They're very parsimonious. They capture a lot of information in a little bit. But we can become quite rigid about our stories. We can hold on to our stories very tightly. And stories often have rules embedded in them. So I ask people to talk to me about what their sleep stories are. And people with insomnia all have stories about their sleep. And they're all very good stories. I don't sleep on Sunday nights before Monday when I have to work, or I haven't slept since my first baby was born, or I haven't slept since I had menopause, or I haven't slept since that night I was stuck preparing for my dissertation 52 years ago. I mean, they all have multiple stories about their sleep. But here's what I tell people. Stories, we're not going to get into whether stories are true or false or good or bad, right or wrong. Stories are always incomplete. And in the world of sleep, that's particularly true. When someone comes to me and says, I haven't slept for the past 3 years, well, I know that's not true, or they probably wouldn't be alive if they truly weren't sleeping as much as they think they are not sleeping for such a long period of time. So their story is, I can't sleep. And each night when they go to bed, they approach the bedroom in bed with the anticipation, the prediction, I'm not going to sleep tonight, because of course I can remember I haven't slept for 3 years. And I can also remember when I don't sleep, tomorrow's a terrible day. I feel bad. I'm cranky with my spouse. I'm not as good on my game at work. And that's a threat. That's an actual physical, psychological threat, as real as I'm being chased by a tiger. It's a danger. And so what we humans want to do when we're in a threat situation, if we can predict it ahead of time, we want to control the environment, change it to keep ourselves safe. And ergo, that means I have to try to make myself come to sleep. But the problem is I cannot. So I get all in a lather, cognitively, physically hyper-aroused. I'm checking, am I falling asleep yet? Oops, no, am I falling asleep yet? And getting very upset. I'm checking the clock, looking at it, seeing the minutes, the hours tick by, thinking how tired I'm going to be tomorrow. All of these are compounding that sympathetic nervous system stress response. And it is not under those conditions that the sleep waves are likely to come in. The sleep waves will come in when we are safe and kind of bored, not when we're threatened. So you can see how conditioned insomnia, which is not necessarily a physiological problem, it's not even necessarily bad habits, although a lot of people with insomnia have what we would consider poor habits that don't support long-term sleep. They have become conditioned because of this prediction and control process, I think, to come to associate bed and bedroom as being a place of danger rather than a place of rest. And that has to be disrupted as well as the habits improved.
I've actually been there in those places where the lack of sleep becomes such a threat. And it is so overwhelming because it's like a catch-22. The more you think about needing to sleep, the more distressed you become, the less likely you are to sleep, and you get really, really stuck. And so what are some of the things that you would recommend? I love that sleep comes when you're bored. That's very powerful. So what are some of the things you would recommend for our listeners? Because I know sleep issues or struggling to sleep is really quite common throughout life. We'll have different times, and sometimes I think of it as different transitions. If you start a new job, you move a country, or there's lots of people who move countries, jet lag, having children. There's a lot of conversation about perimenopause here, I'm sure globally. So all these transitions invite sleep issues. So what can we recommend for our listeners if they are struggling with sleep?
Well, I think what we can do is first we want to reassure people that even good sleepers, certainly normal sleepers, have bad nights. And that is to be expected. So if you're doing along swimmingly and you have a couple of nights, even a week, where sleep is bad, that doesn't mean, oh no, I'm going back into my insomnia pattern. Good sleepers have bad nights, good bad weeks. There's a theory for insomnia development. It's called the 3P theory. The first P stands for predisposing factors, and that says everybody's born to be some sort of a sleeper. A good sleeper, a poor sleeper, a light sleeper, a whatever kind of sleeper. Our kid came out of the womb with a 9 o'clock bedtime. That is not what I had been led to believe was going to happen, but that was just a fact. So everybody's born to be a certain kind of a sleeper. And women are more predisposed towards sleep difficulties than men are. Sometimes they're genetic factors. You can talk to people whose siblings or parents have all been poor sleepers, or maybe they were raised in a traumatic household, and their nervous system just got wired up towards hypervigilance at night, and because of the threat that they were under when they were very young. I mean, all these things is one to be some sort of a sleeper. But then the second P stands for precipitating factors. And so the theory would say, just as you were giving these examples, Emma, often there's something that happens in life that starts the insomnia pattern off. So it might be menopause. It might be the birth of a child. It might be that dissertation that I was studying for 57 years ago. It might be a car accident, a bereavement, a major health problem. Any number of things can kick us up into a poor sleep pattern. And insomnia is defined as trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early at least 3 nights a week for at least 3 months. I mean, that's chronic insomnia. And it has to be interfering with daytime quality of life. So there are many people who are short sleepers that are just fine during the day. They're not impacted. So if you're getting 6.5, you might feel like you're a wreck, and this person's getting 6.5 and they feel dandy. So it's not really insomnia if the perspective is sleep isn't poor. But anyway, those are the precipitating factors. But one would expect that as the more time goes by from this precipitating event, then you would drop back down below that insomnia threshold and become the kind of sleeper that you were previously, right? Makes sense. But that doesn't always happen. And so the theory says often the reason that doesn't happen is because of our habits and behaviors, our perpetuating factors. These are things that we do that seem logical. For example, I had a terrible night's sleep, so instead of get up at 7, I'm going to get up at 9. I wake up at 9, I feel a lot better. So these things in the short run may even appear to be helpful. But in the long run, if they are maintained, they actually disrupt our body's natural ability to sleep, because our body's sleep physiology is controlled by 2 processes. One is homeostatic sleep drive, where That's our need to sleep gets higher and higher and higher. It should be high at nighttime. That helps us fall asleep and stay asleep. And then our circadian biorhythm. And these two things, and that our body temperature rises and falls in a sine wave, and the melatonin levels rise and fall. And those two processes work together. And so some of these perpetuating factors interfere with one or both of these processes. So for example, if instead of getting up at 9, I sleep by 7, I get up at 9, I feel better, great. But now what I've done is I've made the length of time between when I got up and when I'm going to bed the next night shorter, so less sleep drive has time to build up. I basically pulled drive out of the bank, so it's less available for night. And I've also potentially mucked with my circadian patterns. Now, one night's not going to make a difference one day, but if you're kind of very irregular in particular in your rise times, our biorhythms, our sleep-wake ones particularly, what they like better than anything is for everything to be done on the same time. I mean, they've done studies like in nursing homes that they could improve residents' sleep if they got them up at the same time, had their meals at the same time, had their recreation at the same time, had their exercise at the same time. Regularity is a very good thing from our circadian's point of view. So you can see how we can fall easily into these patterns that make sense, but they are compromising the two processes' abilities to be as robust individually and to work together as well as possible. So that answers your question?
Yeah, and it was reminding me of clients and even myself where because we get so obsessed with how much sleep we need, it will, it's not uncommon for people to get to bed at 9 o'clock because they had a bad night's sleep and then really struggle to fall asleep and then wake up feeling unrested and then decide actually I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock.
Or wake up too early because they did go to sleep at 9 instead of at 11, but now they're, I'm awake at 4:30.
Yes. And it does become this sort of vicious cycle. And this idea of sleep drive is really powerful because we can control that by managing more consistent sleep.
Yeah, we can control it to some extent, but you have to be really careful in the world of sleep to put the language of this is something I can control. You have to apply that expression quite carefully, I think, because sleep drive isn't exactly under our control. We can control how much time it's been since the last time we slept and whether there was a nap in the middle that also pulled it out of the bank. But what we're trying, these are natural physiological processes that are working not under our conscious control, and we're just trying to create the context in which they're going to be as efficient as possible. And what we do have under control is our environment and our behavioral responses to the situation.
So catching up on the weekend is a myth?
Well, myths are like stereotypes, right? They all have a little bit of truth to them. And it's, I think what I was saying just a minute ago is if you have a really hard time getting enough sleep during the work week and you have that extra time on the weekends, sleeping in may make you feel better. And if you don't have insomnia, then God bless you. Go ahead and do it as much as you want. I mean, we only need to follow these rules strictly if our sleep is a little bit touchy. So I have people actually who go through CBT-I with me and their sleep gets much better. And they say, okay, now that I've seen you for 6 sessions, Sue, I'm going to go live my life and I'm going to do what I want. And I talk to them about how to ease back into how to peel off the sleep plan recommendations I'd given them, kind of very slowly, so they can monitor if something seems to go awry, catch it quickly. But sometimes they'll call me up and they'll say, darn it, I started trying to check my emails in bed again, and now my sleep's gotten all messed up. And my friends, they all check their emails, but it's just not fair. And I say to people, yeah, it's just not fair, but it's not fair that my 65-year-old sister-in-law got COVID and it turned her into a type 1 diabetic too. She can't eat what she wants. She can't. That's not fair, but that's the body you got. So it's up to you. You get to decide, are you going to do things that you know have good data show you interfere with your sleep? And there's lots of things that people will do. A big, heavy, spicy Mexican meal like at 11 at night and then go to bed at midnight, or have those extra 2 glasses, 3 glasses of wine before bed, or whatever they do that they know reliably based on their experience is going to impair their sleep. But for this night, that's worth it to me. And I understand it's a choice I've made and I'm going to pay a consequence. But it's not like I'm a victim of my insomnia. There's a high correlation here between these behaviors and the quality of my sleep. So I'm going to try to avoid these things most of the time in the spirit of getting good sleep, knowing that sometimes I'm going to be living a life that I'm not going to do that. That is quite different, knowing that you have a vulnerability to certain things impairing your sleep, and you get to choose whether you do those things or not. And there's no rule book of the universe that says you have to do it that way. But that's very different from feeling like I have no control over my sleep. I'm a victim. I'm powerless here. You don't have control in the sense you can't turn your sleep on and off, but you do have control over your habits and your environment and your responses to sleep difficulties.
I find it very validating, and I didn't know about these precipitating factors that some people, that we all sleep differently. Maybe there's certain categories, but I didn't know that. Anybody who is a parent of more than one child can see. I have 3 children, and my eldest was a fantastic sleeper. My second was cataclysmic, and my third is a great sleeper, but she's a night owl and was a bit like your son. From day one, slept late, but slept in, and she still does. I mean, she's 9 and her ideal sleep time is 11 o'clock at night, which is a problem because school does not allow for afternoon shifts. But so looking at it in children feels quite obvious, but I think we sort of forget that continues and that some of us are lighter sleepers or need less sleep, or perhaps is it true that there are transitions in life that change our need for sleep? Is that true too?
Well, and for sure with kids there are. But it's interesting. I'm reminded as you're talking, I heard a speaker once at a sleep conference, and he was saying in the old days before people had to get, when they had to get married before they lived together, often the first fight that a couple would have would be after they got married was about sleep, because he'd want to stay up until and watch the 11 o'clock news and have her on the couch cuddling with him, and she wants to go to bed at 9, have him cuddle in bed and then go to sleep early. And they were shocked that, because sleep is one of those things you just assume the way I do it, the way my family does it is the way everybody does it. And you don't know any difference. It's like you're too young to remember the Waltons, but it used to be this TV show that was on. And at the end of the show, they were a farm dwelling family. And someone would say, "Good night, Pa," and someone would say, "Good night, Joe," and "Good night, Harry." And the lights would go out one by one, like this giant family. They're all going to bed at the same time, So we have this idea that sleep is just one thing. But yeah, it just isn't. This speaker said, unless you are married to your first cousin, there's no reason to believe physiologically that you should be married to someone with the same circadian pattern as yourself.
And does it change? Because I've certainly noticed I was a massive sleeper up until having children. And then my sleep really changed. And my hours changed. I seem to sleep earlier, which has, and my husband sleeps later. So we've now shifted. And I seem to need less sleep, which is rather convenient sometimes. I've had some periods of my life where I've been up ridiculously early and rather excited by it because the house is quiet, and I then paid the price later on. I had a few weeks where I was getting up at 4 o'clock and getting a ton of exciting work done, and Chris and I were writing our books, and then it'd start to catch up.
there's a tendency as we age, sometimes people's circadian clocks shift. They may move to earlier wanting to go to bed. That's called advanced sleep phase, or sometimes they move to going to later. With aging, advanced sleep, wanting to go to bed earlier is more common. So your whole body rhythm, the dropping of temperature and the raising of melatonin, everything sort of syncs over, shifting your tendency from maybe how it was when you were younger. That's something that can happen. Another thing that happens, so I talked about the sleep stages earlier. There's stages 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's REM sleep, dreaming. And stages 3 and 4 are our deep sleep. And that's the sleep that everybody, when they come to see me, wants. They want to fall into bed, go to sleep, and stay in a coma until they spring out of bed the next morning, ready for the day. And they've got these trackers, of course, that are telling them how much deep sleep they're getting, and they're constantly monitoring their trackers. And the thing about deep sleep, it is really good stuff. It's when human growth hormone gets put out, and it's when the lymphatic systems increases the cerebral spinal fluid in your brain by 60% and flushes out all the toxins from the day. I mean, it's really great stuff. But if you look at graphs of how deep sleep changes as we age, each decade it goes down, 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 down. And by the time it Chris's and my age, you are just not getting hardly any deep sleep at all. REM sleep, on the other hand, doesn't change much over the course of a lifetime. So if you have the same amount of REM and much less deep sleep every decade, so that affects menopausal women too. They're getting up in decades. You're having much less deep sleep. Then ergo, what you have left in between is more time spent in lighter sleep. And by definition, lighter sleep you can wake up out of easier. There might be a light or a noise, or your bladder singing to you, or there's a kink in your neck from the pillow, or whatever. In deep sleep, that sort of stuff, you just sleep right through it. But in lighter sleep, it's more likely to wake you up. And then once you're awake, you may have a harder time falling asleep, particularly if you've got all this sleep anxiety associated with being awake and thinking waking up is bad. And I mean, that just really exacerbates it, makes it worse. But so there are things that happen in life physically, and kids are a whole nother picture. I don't work with kids' sleep, so I can't speak to it much, except I can say that in the teen years, teens' circadian clocks shift that opposite direction I was talking about, that delay, to where their body wants them to go to bed later and sleep in later. And it's usually well in their 20s before it starts to kind of slip back. And so what we try to do with kids, right, is when I was on that podcast in Singapore, they were talking about raising their kids. And one of the speaker interviewers was saying that she was very faithful when her kids came along to use the Ferber book to Ferberize her kids, to put them on a really strict schedule in bed and make them stay there and just cry themselves to sleep. And she has 2 or 3 kids. I only had 1. I was incapable of Ferberizing my kid. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But it's an example of how we train children to sleep into patterns that mimic what adults do. And more or less, we're pretty successful in doing that. So that also contributes to this myth that I have control over my own sleep. I trained up my kids' sleep. I should be able to train up mine too. But all we trained up was the environment and the behaviors, and then the kids went to sleep when they did. And we know of plenty of kids who go to bed when mom says to go to bed, but then they lie in bed reading with a flashlight for hours until they fall asleep. So but it, I think, feeds further this myth that I should be able to make myself sleep the way I want, which you cannot.
A few words about melatonin.
Melatonin, very popular. I will say, for those of you who are international listeners, in the United States, melatonin is not FDA regulated. That means you have no way of really knowing if you go to the drugstore and buy a bottle what's in there. They've done studies that have shown if you get a whole bunch of different brands at different dosage levels and they measure the actual melatonin product in the bottles, it might be 78% of what it says on the label it's going to have, or it may be almost 5 times as much as it says on the label that it has. There's no quality control assurance with melatonin. So that is a big problem in the States. I know, I think in Singapore it's by prescription only, or maybe in the UK too. But here, that's a big issue. Many people think melatonin is a sedative. It will put them to sleep like a sleeping pill. Melatonin is not a sedative. It's a messenger signaling to the brain that turns on when it starts getting dark. Melatonin production is turned on in the pineal gland, and bright light turns it off. So that's why I'm getting up to eat in the middle of the night and opening the refrigerator door and looking to see what's there to eat. Bad. That's a bright light going in through your eyes. It's going to turn off your melatonin, as do screens, unless they're carefully blocked for any blue lights. So it's not intended to work like a sedative. It's intended to signal to your body it's time to start getting sleepy. Natural melatonin at its peak in the body is probably somewhere between 0.2 or maybe 0.5 to 0.8 milligrams, probably because remember, it goes up and down, probably goes up and down from 1.2 to 0.58 milligrams. So people who are taking 10, I had one client taking 20 milligrams of melatonin every day. And of course, she's not getting it from the pharmacist, so goodness knows how much melatonin she's actually taking. But she believes she's been taking 20 milligrams of melatonin. That's way, 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 way more than your body needs. And it's a relatively, that you can get some adverse side effects or side effects with interactions with medications. But it doesn't have a ton of adverse effects associated with it. And taking the supplement doesn't turn your own melatonin production off. But obviously, if your own body is producing maybe 0.5 milligrams of melatonin and you're consuming 20 or 10, your own signals are being way overridden. It's got a pretty short half-life, but you're not allowing your system, your natural body system, to work as it's intended to do. That said, I know many people who swear by melatonin, that they really believe it's the answer to their dreams. I have an older adult client who has had sleep problems for years, and his doctor just recently put him on melatonin, and the last time I saw him, he says, I haven't slept in years. I'm sleeping now. Is that because he's melatonin deficient? Some people are, and actually melatonin supplementation is very useful and important for them. Is this placebo? Maybe. Plus, we as psychologists, we know placebo is a very good drug. I got nothing against placebo. And so if melatonin is helping you, I generally don't, try to get people to stop taking it. I do give them the spiel that I've just given you, which leads to the conclusion you don't really know what you're taking, and we don't know if this is placebo or if you really need it because you haven't had a test to find out if you're melatonin deficient. If you want to keep taking it, it's probably not going to hurt you much. It is good for jet lag. So you can take melatonin 1 to 3 days before you travel, and you take it at the time that it will be dark and you will be wanting to go to sleep in the place you are traveling to. It's not a sedative, so it won't put you to sleep if you're taking it at 3 in the afternoon so you can go to sleep at 11 where you are going. But it starts that signaling process cueing initially, and then you keep taking it for a couple of days after you get there. And then you can do it in reverse, coming back home. And there is some evidence that this eases jet lag symptoms. But again, in the clinical trials, even with jet lag, the improvements in sleep are relatively modest. We're not talking about everybody has a spectacular response. And the trials are kind of mixed in terms of some come out negative. They aren't better than placebo. So it's just...
And that would have been prescription grade melatonin in those studies.
Well,
and
almost certainly the randomized trials, yeah.
Right. So they knew the doses accurately.
Sometimes in those bottles that they found that there wasn't the right amount of melatonin, they also had contaminants in them. Some of these bottles did, which is not good. So
that is so concerning because it's quite popular here in Singapore. We get melatonin in the chemist. You don't need a prescription, and it's quite popular for jet lag, but it's also popular for children who struggle to sleep. I know families who use it, especially with the neurodivergent community. It's not uncommon, so I had no idea. I guess it makes sense if something isn't necessarily being controlled.
I don't know the literature at all on neurodivergent kids, but I do know some of the reviews I've seen on melatonin use suggest that melatonin use in kids is not well studied. In fact, sleeping medication use in kids is not well studied, but there was just a couple of years ago, there was a study in the UK, a survey, and they found that in the previous 7 years, there'd been like a huge increase in prescription medication, sleeping meds for children. So this trying to get our kids to sleep better is on the rise, and we don't have really as much data, I don't think, in the research literature to support it as we would like.
Scary.
What do you think about sleep medication? I mean, it's not unusual for me to meet clients who are on sleep medication, either muscle relaxants or hypnotics. What are your thoughts on using sleep medication to help with insomnia?
So, despite my training in the ACT community, I'm not strongly opposed to people taking sleep medicines, in part because people who have been long-term users particularly, sleep medicines are very psychologically addictive. They're not easy to get off of. And you think about why that would be. Well, because they work. If my fear is I have insomnia, I can't sleep, and I take Zolpidem every night, and I go right to sleep, bam, well, that gets reinforced pretty quickly. And people then lose their trust in their body's natural ability to sleep. So I have some people who are coming to me, and they want their sleep to improve, but they also want to taper off their meds. And I have a tapering plan that I'll work with people to get them off of meds. And it's so slow. It's slower than any physician would ever put them on, because I'm not concerned about getting them to where they're not going to have adverse physical effects. I'm trying to get them psychologically prepared, because if you're going to successfully taper off a sleep med that you've been on for a long time, you have to believe your body knows how to sleep without them. You have to trust that that's in there. You have to have a really good reason to do it. And my doctor's not going to prescribe it after this bottle is empty anymore. It's not a good enough reason. There's always another doctor out there that will do it. So you have to have a personal reason, and you have to be able to tolerate having nights you don't sleep, because normal sleepers have bad nights. And so people have to have these pieces in place, I think, to successfully get off of sleeping meds. And if they don't have that, then I don't try to get them off the med. I just say, well, let me know when you want to.
I see it a lot with clients that present with anxiety disorders, and insomnia often comes hand in hand, or with clients who are struggling with their mood too. And so sleep medication is often prescribed alongside their SSRI or whatever other medication they may be on. And you're absolutely right that the idea of trusting that sleep is something we can't control. And with sleep medication, of course, you feel like you can control, and for some people, the sleep medication doesn't help. And it's even more frustrating when the sleep medication doesn't help, because not even that. But for those that it does, it is like a light switch. Take it.
Well, lots of people take something at the start of the night, and then when they wake up at 2, they take something else. But they have to be careful what they take, because they don't want to feel too groggy the next day. So they have to titrate their dosages just right. It becomes quite a convoluted effort to maintain your sleep pharmaceutically.
And isn't that agitating in and of itself? Waking up in the night and having to then think about how much I take, because if I take too much, then doesn't that wake you up as a process? Having to
Well,
plan your
one
medication
of
in
the
the
things
middle of the
we're not
night?
going to have time today, I don't think, to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT-I strategies very much. But one of the things that many people now do in CBT-I, including myself, incorporate into their version of CBT-I is mindfulness strategies. And
Mm.
and mindfulness is not a sedative either. So if people come back to me and say, I tried it and it didn't work, what do you mean it didn't work? It didn't put me to sleep. Well, it's not supposed to put you to sleep. It's supposed to give you, if you're using mindful strategies in the middle of the night, it's supposed to give your mind something quiet and boring to do while you wait for the sleep waves to come back. So it's an attempt to provide the mind with something other than that ramping up the sleep anxiety, the cognitive hyperarousal about the fact I'm not asleep. And of course, it's very useful for all sorts of things in daily waking life too. So, I mean, there's not much to dislike about mindfulness practices, but
Actually, one of the lessons that I found most helpful was to realize that rest is really good for you. So whether you sleep or not, sort of paradoxically, I used to say to myself when I was struggling with sleep, rest is good too. Like just resting. And it's
yeah,
quite
resting.
relaxing.
Yeah, it is relaxing, and it's not the same as sleep. But here's the thing: when you go through those sleep stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, one is a transition stage. It's very light, and if you wake someone up out of stage 1 sleep, it's possible, and you say, "Were you asleep yet?" They will say, "No." Their brain hasn't caught up with their cortex hasn't caught up with the fact that their brainwaves have changed. They're like in the first stage of sleep. They're drifting there. And yeah, that's not that deep coma stage 3, 4 sleep that everybody wants, but it's part of nature's, our biology of sleep. We transition up and down. And lots of times when people are these paradoxical insomnia types and they swear I don't sleep all night, and then they go in a sleep lab and they got 5 good hours according to brainwaves. Lots of times these are people who part of that sleep is in this lighter sleep. And so they think they're not asleep because they're kind of moving in and out, and they're kind of bobbing up with conscious wakenings, and maybe they're looking at the clock, and or they'll say, I don't think I slept from 4 to 6, but I was surprised it was 2 hours that had gone by. Well, so I tell people, if you have a period of time that you aren't sure whether you're asleep or awake, chances are you were asleep a good chunk of it. If you're wide awake, your mind is, boy, I am awake.
Yeah.
That's a different experience from this, I'm kind of in and out. And people think the in and out is bad, but the in and out is part of that natural sleep cycle process. And it's restful as long as you're not upset about it.
I found that was, it was very powerful. And it took away some of the agitation around whether I'm going to be rested enough to do what I needed to do the next day. And I use it with the kids. Like one of my sons does a lot of football. And so sometimes he'll be back from having done a match at 9 o'clock at night and he struggles to fall asleep, of course, because he's just had a lot of adrenaline. And so that's what I say to him. It's okay. You can just rest your body. Often that really helps him to then eventually fall asleep when his body is ready to, but takes away that I must sleep, I must rest. Because even children, I mean, are given this message that you need to sleep because your body needs it to recover, if they're, very physical and very athletic, or your body needs it in order to study. And there's already a pressure that I noticed that I didn't have around sleep needs. Like they're taught about sleep habits and being able to sleep, what you need to be able, no screens, et cetera, which are all good ideas. But I can see those stories building about the importance of sleep
But of
and that
course, we all do
pressure.
need sleep. I mean,
Yes.
that the messaging is correct, that sleep is important.
Yes.
So is breathing. Yeah, it's important. It's just not something that we can control. And that we shouldn't be so obsessed with it. I've got people who have insomnia, and they're not only thinking about their sleep when they're getting ready for bed and during the night when they're awake, but they're thinking about it all day. What's tonight's sleep's going to be like? What's tomorrow going to be like of tonight's bed? What was the it's sleep becomes one of those kind of tunnel vision where Chris is looking through a tube thing where all you're seeing is your sleep, and your quality of life is greatly diminished. You're not getting up and going to the gym or going to lunch with your friends or even going to dinner that night with a guest from out of town because I had a bad night's sleep. So world's going to really greatly shrink if people become overly preoccupied with their sleep. And I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying you have to be clear where you have control and where you do not, and start trying to let go of some of the myth information about what your personal risk is for getting 6.5 hours sleep at night instead of the 7.5 or 8 that you're aspiring to.
Yeah. And I think this idea that we each have a sort of sleep need, sleep sort of predisposing factors. Some of us are light asleep, and that can change over time, which sort of adds to the desire to control, is very validating. That is very helpful. And I could see how that will help a lot of our listeners. This idea that we're all different and our sleep needs are different, but the way we sleep is also different. And to understand that and to be compassionate with ourselves if our body isn't ready for sleep, instead of forcing it to sleep and setting us up to feel more relaxed and more bored. I think that's a very good invitation that perhaps we're more likely to sleep. But as soon as we want it, probably won't get it, as we say in the act world.
Yeah, I mean, I think sleep is definitely more dissatisfying to many people as they get older because they remember what it was like before. I had someone at my office just last week who was talking about how he wants to get to where he doesn't use any sleep medications and he never wakes up at night. He says, I hate waking up at night. And I've reminded him he's almost 80 years old and his sleep, chances are he's going to wake up more often at night. And he says, well, I didn't used to. And we laughed because he knows that too. But it's like, it's harder to get the kind of sleep as you're older than it was when you were younger. But many younger people are not getting the sleep they want because there's so much workplace stress or family demands or all the other things that are going on in a middle-aged person's life that may make it difficult for them to fall asleep at night. So probably many people are holding on to their own story, their own myth, like the Waltons, that I used to be able to do this and it was great every single night. And chances are it wasn't great every night, even back then, but they don't remember that in the story.
And that poor sleep isn't dangerous. I think that's also very important. Is this fear that if I have a few months of bad sleep or if I'm not sleeping my 8 hours, this is not going to be damaging my health. I think there's this idea at the moment that you need to aim for your 8 hours. Otherwise, you're going to get dementia or all kinds of other issues. And that creates more anxiety too. And that sounds like that's also a myth.
Yeah, you need to get 8 hours, you're going to get dementia is like a whole other show, I think.
Yes.
We can talk about that with Claudia, maybe.
Yeah, we were planning on that. So that would be another one to look
It's like all of the stories about sleep and health. It's so much more complicated than the popular press leads us to believe. Not to say there's not some truth to it, much less truth to it than people are led to understand, I think.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Well, sleep is something we all do, right? Sleep is good. I love it when I sleep well, but I don't every night. And I guess that's the main message is you don't have to sleep great every night. You have to get enough sleep for you, whatever that is, to have the ability to function and live life well during the day. And being excessively preoccupied with your sleep will not help you sleep better. It will make it worse, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. Well, this has been really helpful. And I've really enjoyed our conversation, Sue. So thank you so much for being with us on Life's Dirty Little Secrets.
Thank you
You're welcome.
for being here.
Well, it's been fabulous.